shows when you were on. I can't really rule it out because, I had my experience with a Bigfoot, which,
right.
I honestly wish I would have never announced it over the air. I really, because, I got a lot of positive and I got some negatives, because I was open about it. But it really opened my eyes that there's things out there that exist that shouldn't exist, according to what we should know. And it's just been so many reports about Mothman, and it's been over so long of a period of time. It just might even, I feel like it possibly, that maybe something exists that we just don't understand. Maybe it's coming from where we don't even know.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree with all of that, frankly. I've never personally seen Mothman or anything. I've seen a few weird things in my life, but, I haven't seen that. But you make a good point, when you talk about the prevalence of these experiences, just sort of existing beneath the surface of American culture, probably worldwide culture, but I can only speak to, what's happening in the U.S. And so, really what you have is this huge phenomenon that's happening that nobody was talking about. Like I mentioned before, something I hear from witnesses time and time again is this idea that they never came forward with their story because they never had any idea that anybody had seen anything remotely similar to them. And so once we started reporting on and investigating the Chicago sightings, and things really took off because that was a very popular story, which naturally, of course it was. Like, it was happening in the third largest city in the nation. And so once that took off, the phenomenon gained a certain amount of popularity, and I think probably the greatest benefit of that was people being able to see that they weren't alone in their experiences, and because of that, we've got people coming forward with sightings from back in the 1960s, where they've just held on to these secrets their whole life, which has to be fantastically isolating, and they wouldn't even talk about it with their friends or loved ones, because the first time they did, they were just laughed at. And so, we've just been getting so many of these older historical reports that it's fascinating to me, because there's no way that I can really consider this phenomenon as having begun in 2017 when it became popular, considering how many historical reports we had received to date.
Well, Tobias, I really think a lot of things are happening. I think the paranormal has opened and blossomed. Everything from UFO abduction cases to, sightings of Bigfoot, to little people. And I think really a lot of people back a few years ago, honestly, if they sit there and say, hey, I saw this creature, right? People would laugh at them. And if they didn't laugh at him, they would go home and say, hey, Joe is really crazy. You know the story he was saying at work today? I mean, now it's opened up more where I think people can share things and not feel like they're going to be looked at as they're loony bin crazy.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I agree that there's more, I guess, mainstream coverage, of these kinds of weird topics. It has me thinking, though. It used to be, back in the 40s, 50s, really all the way through like the 1970s, that when people would have experiences like this, say they saw a monster, Bigfoot, a UFO or something, like, it was pretty common for people to call the police. It was pretty common for people to, talk directly to mainstream media sources and get their name in the paper. And, I would say while, maybe people are talking about it, more to each other somewhat, and there's definitely more platforms available for people to report their experiences. I think we're seeing a whole heck of a lot less people who are calling the police. There are definitely a lot less people who are willing to talk to the media directly. That seems pretty rare to me. And so, for instance, you had Calvin Parker on pretty recently, right?
Yeah, about 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I think he's a perfect example. After his abduction experience, it was pretty common narrative, frankly. I wouldn't presume to speak for him, but as far as I'm aware, that created a lot of difficulty in his life.
Oh yeah,
and that's sort of the same story for a lot of those witnesses, and I think that's why the last time you really saw a lot of people come forward would have been in the 1970s, maybe early 80s. I think Whitley Strieber is probably the last big witness that I can think of who sort of famously came forward, and you just stopped seeing that. And I think culturally, people really learned their lesson. I think people really saw guys like Calvin and Whitley and Travis Walton and all of these guys, and they saw what coming forward did to their lives, and it was hugely disruptive.
Well,
and people just don't want to talk to the media. Like they don't want to ruin their lives like that anymore.
And it just ruined their lives in such a way as of divorce. Virtually everybody that has come forward has been in divorce over it. That is a major thing. Two is what they had to go through with the police department. I mean, come on, the sheriff and the police department don't really. They take because they have to take the information down. But when they start all of a sudden making you take a polygraph test, they treat you almost like you're a criminal, and that's does a lot of emotional stress on somebody. And then you have the rumors. So if you live like in a small town, for example, like what happened, with Walton up in with Oregon, for example, people were talking behind his back, and it's again like with Calvin, the same thing. Parker, I mean, people were talking, behind his back, and I guess it takes a lot of. How can I say it? When it happens to you, it takes a lot of time to recover, and maybe you don't recover the whole life you're living because you know what happened, but people around you still kind of look at you like, you're out to sell a book, or you're out to do this, or you're out to make get a movie, script going or something, and a lot of people are scared to go. They'll talk to their friends about it and say, "Hey, I saw a Bigfoot." They have no problem with that, but they don't want to go to the authorities because I think they have learned what happened to the other people when they have gone to the authorities.
Yeah, definitely. You'll get nothing but agreement from me on that front. It's pretty obvious to me what happens to people, and so I have this conversation quite a bit, with colleagues in the paranormal field where there are a lot of people who they just kind of complain a lot that how can you take these people seriously? Nobody calls the police anymore. All of these witnesses want to remain anonymous, and I question how often the people in this field saying stuff like that actually ever speak to witnesses, because if they did, they would understand that these are real people with real lives, and just like you said, they don't want to ruin them, because you're absolutely right. I mean, it does lead to all kinds of family issues that can cause divorce. People might turn to addiction or something. It's just bad news, and nobody's making any money off of this. By the way, like none of those guys got rich by telling people they were abducted by aliens. Not one of them, and none of them expected to. If you want to make money, go to business school.
Yeah.
It's much easier than putting your whole life through the media ringer.
And it doesn't. It doesn't go away. It stays with you for the rest of your life. I asked Timothy Cullen one time. He's been on my show numerous times. He's a Facebook friend of mine, and we say hi all the time. But you know what? I asked him one time. I said, "Have you ever wrote a book or thought about it?" And he goes, "No." And I can honestly, when I really think about what he went through, okay, being one of the implant removals from Dr. Roger Lear, that made news media and all that stuff. Maybe a lot of people afterwards, they just want it forgotten because, also I've talked to a couple of people that have been abducted. It's been on my show. They said it caused them to lose their job, their career, you name it. So, I mean, coming forward, they came forward because they thought that was the right thing to do because they were scared. They didn't know what to do. But, I don't know.
Yeah, well, and we're talking, if you're talking specifically about alien abduction, I mean, these are woefully traumatic experiences that often go completely untreated. Frankly, most of the people who go through something like that need intensive therapy, and not because there was anything wrong with them before, but because what they went through is so damaging. I mean, if somebody can just even try to imagine what it's like to be taken against your will, which is bad enough, but taken from someplace where you should feel safer than anywhere else, taken out of your own home. And then you add to that layer of trauma the otherworldly nature of the phenomenon, which, it just in and of itself causes an almost existential terror in that it challenges our most basic beliefs. I mean, it turns your entire worldview upside down. And so it's no wonder that there are all kinds of negative consequences in people's lives. Like, these people don't need to be ridiculed in the media. Like, these people need professional help because they've been through something that it's just terribly traumatic.
Well, and one thing, the difference is that some of the people like Calvin and some of the other people up to about last week, I've tried to have at least 3 abduction cases on a week for the last 3 weeks. And everything I've talked to, and even in the past, the people that I truly feel that they were abducted, they have always said the same thing, that they weren't giving off warm, fuzzy orbs when they were abducted. They felt totally humiliated. They felt that how can I say it? That they felt pain going through the examination. They felt a lot of resentment that they were taken from their house, their car, or whatever happened, or on the dock where Calvin Parker was, him and his friend. They were out fishing. Right. And then something grabbed them, and next thing that they were being examined. They all have told me the same thing. They feel that these aren't here to serve man. They're not friendly like a lot of people write these books about aliens. They're here to protect mankind. These people that have been abducted, the majority of them come back and they say that, hey, they don't feel that way. They're not here to serve man. They're not here for man's interests. They're here for some other type of motive.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if people remember correctly, To Serve Man was the name of the cookbook in that Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah, it sure was.
And Yeah, I mean, it's much more in line with that, I would suspect, than with any sort of, field